with the Student Learning and Achievement Committee led by Ms. Jill Kamnitz. Ms. Kamnitz.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I share the responsibility for this committee with my colleague, Dr. Olivia Oxendine. And we start off today with a very lengthy, information-filled presentation on our academic performance last year. And I intend to start my introduction today with a statement about school performance being judged by the scores alone, but Chair Davis has beat me to it very eloquently. So I thank you. I don't need to make that speech. And we will ask Dr. Howard to get us started.
Dr. Howard, could you turn on?
Thank you. So as we begin our discussion today, I'd like to draw our attention to this theory of action that also mirrors the order of the presentations that we're beginning to share with you. I will begin this morning with sharing the testing and accountability results for the 2023-24 school year, to be followed by our colleagues Ron Dixon and Alex Charles, who will be sharing information on school improvement, including our low-performing designation list and our federal comprehensive and targeted support and improvement list. We will conclude with information from Curtis Sonneman, who is going to share some data dashboards that allow us to share this information with internal, external stakeholders and the general public, most importantly, parents and other users of this information. This order of the presentation also captures our theory of action. And it's interesting that we began with the testing and accountability results, but a key takeaway is that is not where we end. That is not what the entire scope of this conversation is about today. The data is a place of looking to see where we are, what happened in 2024 for a data perspective. That goes forward from this point to focus on the real purpose of testing and accountability, which is school improvement and increasing student achievement. We're very fortunate to have a strong structure internally in the department that addresses that, and we also have so many colleagues across the state every day that are engaged in school improvement and increasing student achievement. This set of data is one piece of information. It is very much encouraged to look at the context of when this data is collected, how this data is collected, how this data is reported out, and using it to its optimal point. We then, of course, in addition to doing school improvement, we also have a responsibility to provide data to all of our stakeholders over the course of the year. So this is not a one-stop for today. This is something that continues on. And as you'll see in the last part of this presentation today, we have made it a priority to try to develop systems that will allow all users, all of those that are interested in this information, access it efficiently and easily for their own uses and purposes. Now, as we have done in the past couple of years, we're going to pause and think about where we have been since 2018-19, which was the last school year where testing and accountability results were reported prior to the onset of the pandemic. If you'll remember, in 2019-20, we did not administer tests and we did not report accountability results. We resumed testing in 2020-21, but we did not report accountability results. And then for the most recent year and the previous 2 years, we have administered tests and we have reported accountability results. The primary reporting today that I will share with you is going to focus on 2022, 2023, and 2024. But before we get to that, we are going to share a few slides looking at the comparison of 2024 to 2019. So as we look at this slide, this is for mathematics, grades 3 through 8, and this is levels 3, 4, and 5. And it's important to orient ourselves to this graphic to note the 100% line at the very top. So our state has always been committed to the long-term goal of ensuring that every student reaches grade level proficiency. So we can very clearly see where we were in 2019 was not at that 100% mark. And those are the vertical lines that you see at the top of each one of those gray bars. So looking to the far left where we have grade 3, you can see in 2019 where the blue line is, and then underneath that, of course, is that bar. So what that is representing is if we look at the data from 2024 compared to 2019, we are 97% back to that proficiency percentage that we were in 2019. So in 2019, we were at 64.3 for grade 3 mathematics. In 2024, we're at 62.4. So that is 97% of that 2019 value. And that is what each one of those subsequent bars represent in this graph. So we just want to be very clear that we're not suggesting that we are 100% to where we all aspire with student academic achievement, because we can very clearly see that line at the top, which is that 100%. But if we look back to 2019, we can see that we are very close to that performance level when we look at grade level proficiency. This is the same information presented, but this is for science, grades 5 and 8. And you can see grade 5 is at 91% back to what we were in 2019. And grade 8 is 89% back to what we were in 2019. Looking at our end of course, we have 4. The one on the far left, of course, is biology. And you can see this is 90% back to what we were in 2019. English 2 is showing 100%. So in 2019, we were at 59.7. In 2024, we're at 59.5. So it's very close. That's why it's showing 100%. NC Math 1 is at 90%. And then we have the anomaly that we have enjoyed since 2022, and that is NC Math 3. And we've had lots of conversations at this presentation in previous years about NC Math 3. So you may remember in that first year in 2022, when we looked at the data for NC Math 3, we saw that it was actually performing higher than it had in 2019. So very important to note, that is why you're seeing 123%, because out the gate, it was ahead of where we were. In 2019 was edition 4 of the reading assessment. 2024 is edition 5. We have some additional slides with this comparison of 2019 to 2024 at the end of this segment. And those slides, we do cautiously share some information on reading, but for now, we will put those to the side. We always begin our presentation with participation. And that is because it is very important that our students participate in an assessment program. If we went back many, many years, that was an issue for state assessment programs. I've often heard that in the early days back in the 90s, about 60% of our students participated in the assessments. So that's just to give you an idea of how far we have come, that you can see on this first slide on to the right, that for 2023-24, for the state targets, all EOG and EOC participation targets were met. And of course, we report this out as all students, and then we also report this out by subgroups as well. And you can see this for ACT and work keys. Now, throughout the history of administering ACT and work keys in North Carolina, we have seen difficulties with meeting the participation targets at the same rate that we do for the EOG and the EOC. And you can very clearly see this on work keys. Work keys has the challenge of identifying who we are supposed to test. And our local education leaders work very hard to get that answer correct, but sometimes they do not. And that is why we see the difficulty here with meeting all these participation targets with the consistency that we do with EOGs and EOCs. EOGs and EOCs are very clearly, if you're a membership in grade 4, then you take the assessment. If you're in membership in English 2, you take the assessment. For work keys, it is that you are a career technical education concentrator. And when one becomes that, can be somewhat tricky. So sometimes we think someone's not going to become one, and they do, and maybe they miss out on the opportunity for the test. So that's why you see these numbers here in the way that you are. We're now going to move to the test results. So as a reminder, our assessments measure the standard course of study for mathematics and reading and the essential standards for science. Those content standards are, of course, adopted by this board. That is always the first step in any test development activity. We then develop assessments that are aligned to those content standards, and we affirm that alignment by conducting external facilitated alignment studies that provide data that supports that these assessments are aligned to our state content standards. I'm sure you're very familiar with the academic achievement levels. We report level 3 and above, which would include levels 3, 4, and 5. That's referred to as grade level proficient. And of course, you'll see GLP throughout the presentation today. We also report level 4 and above, which is college and career readiness. And you'll see CCR. And that, of course, is the level to which these content standards are written to measure college and career readiness. Grade level proficiency is a worthy goal. It is noted in the descriptor for grade level proficiency that students scoring at a level 3 may need additional assistance in the subsequent grade or course. We also in this report provide each academic level information, and just to stress that some of the details are available in the annual testing report, which is available on the board site. The PowerPoint does not go into all of the minutia and the detail that is available for all of our users. So we've done a little bit different presentation, if you will, of the data this year. So we want to start with explaining what these charts are going to look like that you're getting ready to see. So on the left-hand side, you see the gray bar and then a dotted line. So the gray bar with the dotted line represents 100 students. The gray bar in its entirety represents 70% that are at grade level proficiency. And then a subset of that bar where you see that white hash mark, that down below, that represents college and career readiness. Because the way to think about it is college and career readiness, which is levels 4 and 5, is a subset of levels 3, 4, and 5. Now, we also on the right-hand side will be sharing information, as I said before, for 2022, 2023, and 2024. The blue on 2024 indicates that of the 3 years that we're looking at, 2024 was the highest. So we'll begin with the end of grade reading. And you can see here, beginning on the far left, grade 3, working over to the right, grade 8. And I would draw your attention to those blue bars. And you can see every grade level has a blue bar with the exception of grade 4 and grade 7. So that means that of all the other grade levels, students had higher percent meeting that level 3 and above than the previous 2 years. And it's also worthy to draw your attention to those hash marks that represent that level 4 and above cut. And so you can see here across time, that level 4 is kind of remaining where it was in 2022. So you'll see some differences as we go through the presentation, but it's important to note those. Now, one other detail that you'll see throughout the PowerPoint that I will not be clicking on throughout the presentation, but it's very helpful to recognize, is if you go to where it has underlined table on your PowerPoint, if you have that, and if you click on it, it takes you to a table with all of the numbers behind the chart that we just saw. So if you want the hard numbers behind all of those different bar charts, all of the hash marks, everything, because this has grade level proficiency and college or career readiness, all one has to do is click on that table. And then to go back, you just click back on chart, and it takes us back to our chart presentation. Now, we also have to think about the orientation, if you will, of when we're going to look at the next chart for reading, and that is the subgroups. So the subgroups, we had to take that column and turn it on its side. So that's what you see on the right hand of this slide is the column turned on its side. So in this case, the gray bar again represents grade level proficiency, but from that white hash mark back to the left is the college and career readiness. And so you can see all of the information on this slide is why we had to turn that bar on its side. You can see all of the different subgroups that we report on the left-hand side going down. And you can see that the subgroup, the ones that are not in blue are consistent with grades 4 and 7, primarily where we know their overall was not in blue either. But for these other grade levels, you know, there's a difference in the blue. If you look, you can see grade 3 has a significant amount of blue. Grade 4 has blue for the AIG subgroup, even though no one else. And then grade 5, of course, is in all blue, which means all of those subgroups perform better than they did in the previous 2 years. So now we'll move to mathematics. And with mathematics, you can see that 2024 bar is in blue all the way across from grade 3 to grade 8. One point to mention here is grade 8 represents grade 8 end of grade mathematics test and NC Math 1 for those students who are taking NC Math 1 on this chart. Here is the subgroups, and consistent with all of those blues across from 3 through 8, you can see all of the subgroups here that met that challenge of scoring the highest in 2024 compared to the previous 2 years. End of grade science, we see that blue column for grade 5. We do not see that blue column for grade 8. Now, grade 8 is very, very close to the previous 2 years, but nevertheless, the 2024 is lower than those previous 2 years. And consistent with what we've already said about subgroups and seeing that same pattern with the blue, you can see that evident here with the end of grade science subgroups. End of course, we're seeing those blue bars in English 2. English 2 is like the similar, the previous example I gave, very, very close to the previous 2 years, but nevertheless, it did meet the criteria of being slightly higher in 2024. NC Math 1, this is high school 9 through 12. So this is not including those grade 8 students that took NC Math 1, and that's because we included them before. So we can't include them multiple times. So we will get to a math slide in a moment that breaks all that down. But for now, we're just looking at grades 9 through 12 here. And you can see NC Math 3 did go down very slightly this year compared to the previous 2 years, but not a great deal down. And similarly, you can see here with the blue bars how English 2 did compared to the other 3 end of course subjects. So this is the grade 8 high school mathematics slide that I mentioned previously. So we break down math into several different categories. To the far left is the EOG math. So these are only the students in grade 8 that took mathematics EOG. That is a small, not necessarily small, but that is a subset of that grade 8 population. You can see this percent proficient at 29 can be somewhat alarming, particularly if one looks at the other grade levels for 3 through 7. But we have to remember this is a subset of the population. This is not all of those students. You can then see grade 8 NC Math 1, that is the rest of those students, and they're taking NC Math 1, and you can see that is very high at 90% are meeting that level 3 and above. Again, the 9 through 12 NC Math 1 is the next set of bars at 37, again, the highest of the previous 2 years. And then all NC Math 1 takes all of those students from the high school, from the middle school. We even have a couple of students here and there that take it in grade 4 or grade 5. So we put all of those together, and that's where you can see the 51. And then the last one again is NC Math 3. And of course, we've already made the point that that did go down slightly this year. So the next set of slides that we're going to look at are what are called a Sankey. And you may remember this from last year. This is looking at the movement from a cohort from 2 years ago to the current year. So we start as an example just to kind of ground ourselves a little bit. So you can see the 4 achievement levels here. And we're just going to assume in the example, this is an example only, that we had 25 percentage points for each one of these levels. And so perhaps we were going to look at a cohort from grade 3 to grade 4. And what the lines in between the far right column and the far left column indicate is movement. And these are students. And so the wider the line, the more students are moving. Now, when we do this analysis, and I'll show you in a moment, we maintain that grade 3 cohort. So the only students that are in this analysis are the students who actually were here for grade 3, grade 4, grade 5. And we know we're somewhat of a transient state, so we know that some students were not here back in grade 3. This again is the example, just showing you we're now going to add grade 5, and you can see the movement. And of course, with that movement, a student at level 3 could go up to 4, and then that student could drop back down to 3. And I think one of the takeaways from this is when we're looking at the state data, it seems so finite, correct? But at our local level, they see more movement. They have the story behind those numbers at that common denominator lower level, where they know those students, they know the teachers, they know the community, and they would probably tell us, oh yes, there's some movement. We have some students that move back and forth, move from level 4 to level 5 down to level 4. So this is the real data. This is looking at reading grades 3 through 5. And the thing to note here is if you look at grade 3, for level 5, for level 4, you see they are increasing the percentage that were meeting that level 3, 4, and 5 in 2023-24. So that's a good indication. The level 3 went down slightly, which is good as they're moving into those higher levels, potentially. We don't know that for sure. And then the not proficient, you can see decreased. And this is real data for that grade 5 cohort this year, looking back to when they were in grade 3. This is reading grades 6 through 8, and you can see the same pattern here with the exception that level 3 is the same at 23%. And then mathematics grades 3 through 5. Level 5 is the same, level 4 went up slightly, level 3 went down, and not proficient went down, which is what we want to see. And then the last one that we have is mathematics grades 6 through 8, and you can see a similar pattern here, except that level 4 went down here, level 3 did go down 1 percentage point, and not proficient did go up. So that one did behave a little bit differently than the other 3 examples that we gave. And perhaps the suggestion here is again back to local perspective on the data. This is something that locally one could look at with a smaller subset at the student level to see where those students are moving across time. We're now going to look at ACT and work keys. So ACT measures English, reading, mathematics, and science. We report the percentage of 11th graders who have a composite score of at least 19, and this is the UNC admission minimum requirement. We also measure work keys, which we've discussed a little bit so far. It measures job skills and applied reading, math, writing, and essential employability skills. And the criteria there is earning a silver certificate or better. So the results for ACT and work keys, you can see here, there are no blue bars in either one of these. Again, going back to the history of participation with ACT and work keys, changing these percentages significantly for a trend line of what we see on EOGs and EOCs, we typically do not see that for these two assessments. And this is the subgroup information for ACT, and you can see the only two blue bars we have are for our English learners that changed slightly, and our students with disabilities that did slightly better than they did in the previous 2 years. And the work key subgroup, the only group that performed better than it did the previous 2 years was the Asian subgroup. We do have a couple of other indicators. The first is ACT and work keys combined. So when we talk about school performance grades, those are put together, and we look at 12th graders and we look to see that they have either one of those. So if I'm in 12th grade and I meet the ACT minimum of 19, then I have a check mark of having met that indicator. If not, perhaps I met the work keys indicator, then I would get a check mark as well. And then math course rigor is the last indicator. And this is not tied to an assessment. This is students who are successfully completing NC Math 3. So that is a teacher reporting grade. And this you can see is a greater than 95%. And that is consistent, even though we're seeing that 94 in 2022, that was most likely more of a participation issue or membership issue. Because we're consistently seeing that 95% greater than for math course rigor. So moving to English learners, these are our students who are identified to get assistance in learning English. They are required by federal law to be assessed annually on the English language proficiency assessment. And we're also required by federal law to report out these three measures. The good news is you can see to the far right on 2024, in comparison to the previous 2 years, 2024 is the highest. So we're moving in the right direction. The first one of these is annual progress towards exiting. So every student has progress targets, and we're just literally looking to see if they met their expected progress target, given the number of years that they've been identified as an English learner. Exiting EL status, those are those students that met their progress target to the point that it met the exiting criteria, which has been set by the state. And then we combine those two together for a total EL progress as required by federal reporting. So you can see for all of those are in the blue. Now we're going to move to school growth. And as a reminder, of course, our growth model is EVOS. And it is using students' previous test scores and then using their current test scores to determine if they show growth. And of course, we always acknowledge that much of what I've already shown you has been around proficiency. So that was students meeting a particular benchmark or meeting that grade level proficiency or meeting college career readiness. School growth is looking at it a little bit differently. It's looking at kind of where you were compared to where you ended up. And of course, for school accountability growth, all of that information is aggregated together. So these are school level results. One other caution before we go to the next slide, I'm going to ask us to kind of forget for a moment everything we said about the blue bar. You won't see those blue bars. So going forward, you'll see some colors, but it will not indicate anything with respect to 2024 and the previous 2 school years. It'll just be provided to give us some reference, if you will, to breaking apart the data. So the growth status for 2024, as you can see here, for exceeded, met, and did not meet is very similar to what we have seen in the previous 2 years in 2022 and 2023. Now, we do break this down a couple of different ways. The first way is we look at school type, elementary, middle, and high, and you can see some variation there between elementary, for example, at 20% of schools not met in the elementary, and then of course in high, that's 35%. So that's a little bit different than we saw on the previous slide where the numbers were so close. We also report by subgroup, and this is a requirement that we must do this. And so here we can see all of the subgroups listed on the left, and then an indication of those subgroups, the percentage that did not meet, that met, or exceeded. And I would draw our attention to the middle column of the met. Within reason, those numbers are all pretty close to one another. You see more variability when we look at not met and when we look at exceeded. So now we're going to turn our attention to the school performance grades. Of course, this is based on 80% achievement and 20% growth. It includes test results for all of our EOGs and our EOCs, the percentage of English learners who met those progress targets that we mentioned a few minutes ago, and the percentage of students who graduate within 4 years of entering high school, which is our 4-year cohort graduation rate. And those are required by the federal government to be included in the accountability model that is used to make those federal designations that my colleagues will be talking about in a few moments. We also have some school quality or student success indicators for elementary and middle schools. This is growth, and that is on mathematics, reading, and science. And high school growth is included in the achievement indicator. So that's just a matter of where that growth is residing. The main takeaway is growth is 20% and achievement is 80%. We also include the EOC assessment in biology. It's actually a school quality or student success indicator for schools that have grades 9 or higher. Again, already mentioned NC Math 3, looking at the percentage that successfully completed that course, and of course the combined ACT and WorkKeys indicator. When we calculate the grades, you can see here the range for A through F. And now we have the results. So the results for this school year, you can see for A, B, and C, all of these went up. They increased from the previous 2 years. We don't have that blue bar anymore, but nevertheless, looking at the numbers, you can see that this has increased. And we can also see that the D and F has decreased. We are providing, again, this Sankey here, just so you can see the pattern over time and to make the point of the movement that we see. So you can see here, particularly if you look at A at 6% in 2022, the A's now are at 8%. And of course, we had some that moved down to a B in 2023, and some B's moved back up to A in 2024. Now, we do not know if those are the same schools or not. So that's not representing necessarily the same schools, but just the fact that we do have some movement across those grades. And of course, the narrower the line, the fewer schools. So then we put together the growth status that we just looked at a few minutes ago with the school performance grade. And you can see, not surprisingly, the A's are at 127 exceeded. So very important to note that. And you can see, the reverse of that is true. When we look at F's, we only have one that exceeded for the F's. Then we also look at school type, and this is something we've looked at in recent years, so I know you're very familiar with it. We always just make the note that at the high school, they have more indicators, and so they have more latitude, if you will, or ability to show what they are doing with math course rigor, with ACT and WorkKeys, with the cohort graduation rate. They have more information that goes into the school performance grades than our elementary and middle schools do. We also report out a school performance grade for subgroups, and you can see those here. And you can see it's fairly well spread out across the different subgroups. And then the last part of this section is the reading and mathematics. We are required by state law to report a school performance grade for both 3 through 8 reading and 3 through 8 mathematics. And you can see the results here, and we would draw your attention to how for A, there are 100 schools, and for reading, there are 30 that got an A. And for mathematics, that continues at 451 for B, 280 for reading. And that, of course, is consistent with those first results we saw, where, remember, across the board, mathematics was doing better than the previous 2 years, whereas reading was not doing that for grades 4 and grade 7. So we do have alternative schools in North Carolina. They all receive a school performance grade for the purpose of federal identification of comprehensive and targeted support and improvement schools. But however, for our state reporting, this board was directed by the General Assembly that they could have an alternative accountability model, which is utilized by several of our schools. They have 3 options. They can have a school performance grade. They can use the DPI developed alternative accountability model, or they can develop one of their own. We provide information today on the option B, which is where they use the NCDPI model. You can see we had 77 schools that chose that option. And of those, 22% were progressing, 62% maintaining, and 16% declining. The 17 that chose their own model, their results were posted on our website for the public to see. And of course, we did have one school that chose to do a school performance grade. So now the cohort graduation rate, and this is actually SLA2, but with respect, we'll go ahead and do that now. So we establish a cohort for when a student comes into the 9th grade. For this year, the 4-year rate is based on 2019-20, and the 5-year rate is based on 2018-19. We're going to look at the 4-year rate. The 5-year rate is available in the annual testing report and on other information on our website. With that cohort, there are very specific requirements of when a student can be removed from the denominator. Those are specified by federal law, and we have monitoring done to make sure that we stay in compliance with that. So once a student is in a cohort, they are there unless there is an excellent reason for them to be removed, such as moving to another school, but that school has to also grant a diploma. So you can't just transfer to another school. It has to be a school that awards diplomas. Now, of course, so what we're doing is we're adding in students, we're taking students out, but that cohort is maintained. So this information to the far left, we're seeing the information for all students, and you can see for the all, we have a blue, which means it's the highest of the past 2 years, and it's at 87%. And then looking across at all the various subgroups, Asian, of course, is in the blue. Our Black student population, Hispanic, and our English learners are also in the blue, meaning their cohort graduation rate is higher than the previous 2 years. The next part is long-term goals. So our long-term goals are required as part of our Every Student Succeeds Act state plan. We have state level goals, and then there are school level goals. In this reporting out, we're going to focus on the state level goals. For the second year, the only state level goal that was met was the cohort graduation rate for the Asian subgroup. So that means the reading and mathematics long-term goals and the English learners progress long-term goals at the state level, those targets were not met. So to round out our conversation, we're going to go back to that comparison to 2019. It's the same information we saw earlier, but just looking at it a little bit differently. So in this case, we will start with end of grade reading. And we do have that footnote at the bottom that we just do want to stress that we absolutely encourage caution anytime we are comparing assessments across editions. And this very clearly is comparing edition 4 to edition 5. But we can see here the difference, and you can see the blue bars, because those blue bars are looking back at the previous 2 years, obviously not back to 2019. And one thing to note is on this particular, most of the slides that we've seen, that white hash mark has been pretty close when we were looking at it. But look at grade 6, and there you can see the difference where those college and career readiness students are now as compared to 2019. This is mathematics. And again, here, this is a good example of how close those bars are. So we can see that the performance of the college career readiness is closer in math to what it was in 2019 than it is now. End of grade science. And the interesting takeaway for me on this slide is how high that bar is on college career readiness for science 5 and 8. That is something that we don't see, I think, in any of the other EOGs and EOCs, except for biology. So this is, of course, the end of course for biology, English 2, NC Math 1, and NC Math 3. And again, English 2, maybe not quite as much, but you can still see that difference in that college career readiness performance in 2024 as compared to 2019.